There is a moment in some police pursuits where the officer behind the wheel makes a decision that most drivers would find almost impossible to understand. They aim, they accelerate, and they deliberately crash into another car. Not by accident, not by desperation, on purpose, with training, with authorization, with a supervisor's voice on the radio telling them to do it. This is real. It happens thousands of times every year across the United States. It has a name, the Precision Immobilization Technique, or pit maneuver, and depending on who you ask, it is either one of the most effective tools law enforcement has to protect the public from a fleeing suspect, or one of the most dangerous, most controversial, and least examined uses of force in modern American policing. Today we are going deep into the PIT, how it works, where it came from, the cases that show it working exactly as intended, the cases where it went catastrophically wrong, the families who lost someone to it, the officers who used it and lived with the outcome, and the national debate, quietly growing for years, now breaking into the open, about whether a tactic designed to bring a car chase to a safe conclusion is doing anything of the sort. We have 4 major cases for today. We are covering the 109-mile-per-hour crash in Fort Smith, Arkansas that killed a man with a mental disability and launched a trooper's patrol car into the air. We are going inside the Georgia State Patrol's 5-year record of over 2,000 pit maneuvers, tied to 19 deaths and nearly 1,900 injuries, and the specific story of 49-year-old Aimee Padgett, whose pursuit started over an expired license plate tag and ended with her being thrown from a rolling SUV on a Georgia interstate. We are covering the Arkansas pregnant woman case that sparked a lawsuit and changed state policy. And we are looking at what the data actually says across the country, across years, about what this tactic really does when it leaves a training facility and hits the road at 100 miles an hour. This is not a video that takes a simple side, because the truth of the pit maneuver is not simple. There are real situations where a vehicle being pursued poses a lethal, immediate threat to everyone around it, and where a deliberate crash is genuinely the least bad option available. And there are situations where an officer crashed into a car going 109 miles an hour because a supervisor told them to get it stopped, and where the person who died had run a red light. Both of those things are real. Both of those things happen. And until we understand both, we cannot have an honest conversation about whether the way American law enforcement uses this tactic is what it should be. Before we get into the cases, have you ever witnessed a police pursuit in person? Either as a bystander, a driver nearby, or someone whose neighborhood it passed through? Drop your experience in the comments. I want to know what that looks like from the street level. What is a pit maneuver? Understanding the technique before the cases. The Precision Immobilization Technique, also known as a Pursuit Intervention Technique, and in some departments rebranded as a Tactical Vehicle Intervention or TVI, was developed in the late 1980s by a law enforcement training organization in West Virginia called BSI Incorporated. The Fairfax County Police Department in Virginia became the first agency to use it operationally in 1988. The mechanics are this: a pursuing officer pulls their patrol car alongside the fleeing vehicle. They position the front corner of their bumper against the rear quarter panel of the suspect's car. Then they apply lateral pressure, turning into the suspect car in a controlled push. If executed correctly at a safe speed, this causes the rear tires of the fleeing vehicle to lose traction, sending the car into a predictable spin. The car comes to a stop facing the opposite direction of travel. The pursuit is over. That is the theory. At low speeds, 35 to 40 miles per hour, the threshold most trained departments use, it can work exactly that way. Clean, effective, safe, a finesse move, not a ram. At high speed, everything changes. A 2023 report by the Police Executive Research Forum, one of the country's most respected law enforcement policy organizations, stated directly, any predictability of this maneuver is lost at higher speeds, and the risk of the suspect vehicle rolling over or colliding into nearby objects and causing serious injury greatly increases. In other words, at 35 miles per hour, the pit can bring a car to a controlled stop. At 80 miles per hour, at 100 miles per hour, at 109 miles per hour, you are not immobilizing a vehicle. You are sending it out of control at highway speed, in a direction that nobody can fully predict, toward whatever happens to be in its path. That is the gap at the center of today's video. The gap between what this technique was designed to do and what it actually does when departments allow it to be used without speed restrictions, without supervisory approval, and at the end of pursuits that started over traffic violations. Comment: did you know the pit maneuver exists and is used routinely by law enforcement? Before watching this video, had you ever seen or heard of it being used? I'm curious what the awareness level is. Fort Smith, Arkansas, April 10th, 2020. Justin Battenfield, a man who liked to drive. Justin Battenfield was 34 years old. He lived in Van Buren, Arkansas, just outside Fort Smith. According to the people who knew him, he received Social Security payments related to a mental disability. He was, in the way that matters most of the people who loved him, a simple man with simple pleasures. He liked to drive. He liked the roads around his home. He had recently purchased a black Dodge Ram pickup truck, something he was clearly proud of. On the morning of April 10th, 2020, just as the sun was coming up, Battenfield ran a red light. A U.S. Forest Service officer saw it and attempted to pull him over. For reasons that were never fully established and never will be, Justin Battenfield is gone. He did not stop. He fled. The pursuit was initiated. Over the next roughly 17 minutes, Battenfield drove recklessly through Fort Smith, through multiple traffic lights, along the shoulder of US 71 to pass other vehicles, weaving through traffic at dangerous speeds. The Sebastian County Sheriff's Office was involved. The Arkansas State Police were called to assist. At approximately 6:54 a.m., Arkansas State Trooper Michael Sean Ellis joined the pursuit as a lead vehicle, a Dodge Charger pursuit model, purpose-built for this kind of work. At this point, the chase moved onto Zero Street, a four-lane divided highway, and Battenfield's Ram was crossing into the westbound lanes, meeting oncoming traffic head-on at well over 100 miles per hour. The situation, by any measure, had become genuinely dangerous. Battenfield was not simply fleeing. He was driving into oncoming traffic. Other motorists were at real risk of a head-on collision at triple-digit speeds. On the radio, a supervisor's voice came through to Trooper Ellis. 14, get up there and get him stopped, because he's driving on the other side of the road, and we need to get him stopped. I don't care if he's brake checking you. Get this car stopped as soon as there's an opening on the highway. Ellis moved up alongside Battenfield's truck. He positioned his front bumper against the truck's rear quarter panel, and at a speed that dashcam footage later confirmed was recorded by GPS at 109 miles per hour, he executed the PIT. What happened next is one of the most dramatic moments ever captured on law enforcement dashcam video. The Ram truck did not spin cleanly to a stop. It slid sideways and came to rest with its undercarriage facing the trooper's oncoming cruiser, essentially becoming a ramp. Trooper Ellis's Charger hit the underside of the Ram and launched into the air. The patrol car went airborne, sliced through two utility poles, and crashed down. Justin Battenfield died in the crash. His truck had collided with a driveway culvert while overturning. He sustained fatal injuries. Trooper Ellis survived. He was hospitalized with injuries that the Arkansas State Police described as multiple serious but not life-threatening. His cruiser was destroyed. The Arkansas State Police announced a joint investigation. Their public statement defended the pit in principle, noting that Battenfield had been driving into oncoming traffic and creating an imminent threat to other motorists. Spokesman Bill Sadler said, "The PIT is supposed to be a controlled maneuver based on all of the factors of that second the law enforcement officer's bumper makes contact with the vehicle. If the suspect changes the dynamics in any way, it could very easily turn bad." Justin Battenfield's mother, Carol Henson, saw it differently. "They should have backed off," she said afterward, "and he would have come on home. Then they could have come up and got him." She had a point worth sitting with. Battenfield's truck had a temporary license plate registered in his name. He was not an unknown. The question of whether a pit at 109 miles per hour, knowing the vehicle's owner, knowing the driver could be located later, was the least dangerous option available is not a question with a simple answer. And it is a question that would come to define a national conversation about this technique. Comment: the supervisor told the trooper to stop the car, no matter what, because Battenfield was driving into oncoming traffic. Was that the right call given what was happening, or should they have backed off and arrested him later? I genuinely want to hear different perspectives on this. Jacksonville, Arkansas, July 2020. Nicole Harper, the woman who was looking for somewhere to pull over. 3 months after Justin Battenfield died in Fort Smith, the Arkansas State Police was involved in another pit maneuver case. This one went in a completely different direction, and it changed the law. Nicole Harper was 30 years old, approximately 2 months pregnant, and driving on a highway outside Jacksonville, Arkansas. An officer clocked her at 84 miles per hour in a 70 mile per hour zone and lit up his lights to pull her over. Harper slowed down. She turned on her hazard lights, the universal signal for, "I acknowledge you and I am looking for a safe place to stop." The dashcam footage later released by her attorney showed her clearly decelerating and moving toward the side of the road. She later said she was looking for a wider shoulder, concerned about stopping on the narrow section of the interstate. Arkansas State Trooper Rodney Dunn did not interpret her behavior as an intent to pull over. He interpreted it as fleeing. And before Harper had the chance to find a wide enough shoulder, Dunn executed a pit maneuver. Harper's vehicle was going approximately 60 miles per hour at the moment of contact. Her SUV flipped entirely upside down. She ended up hanging in her seatbelt inside an overturned vehicle on an Arkansas highway, 2 months pregnant. Trying to understand what had just happened, Dunn approached the overturned vehicle to help her out. In the footage, Harper can be heard saying, "I thought it would be safer to wait until the exit." Dunn's response, captured clearly on the dashcam, became one of the most quoted moments in the national conversation about pit maneuvers. "No, you should pull over when law enforcement stops you. We call that a pit maneuver. When people flee from us, that's what happens." Harper's baby survived. She survived. Trooper Dunn faced no criminal charges. But what happened next was significant. Harper filed a lawsuit against Dunn and the Arkansas State Police. She argued that his use of the maneuver on a vehicle that was slowing down and indicating an intent to stop was not just disproportionate, it was dangerous and negligent. The case went to federal court, and in 2021, Harper settled, with terms that went beyond money. As part of the settlement, the Arkansas State Police agreed to restrict its use of the pit maneuver. The new policy required that pits could only be used to protect a third person or an officer from imminent death or serious physical injury. It was a meaningful shift. No longer could a trooper use a tactic simply because someone was failing to stop for a traffic violation. The policy changed, but the behavior, record showed, had not fully followed. Between 2016 and 2022, the number of pits used by Arkansas State Police actually rose by a reported 387%. In 2023, 3 drivers were killed in 3 months as a result of pit maneuvers in the state. The gap between written policy and on-the-ground practice is a recurring theme in this conversation, and it is one that the next state we are covering took to a completely different level. Here is a question that I think gets to the heart of this case. If you are a driver who has been signaling that you are slowing down to pull over, and a police vehicle rams you at 60 miles per hour, is that justice? Or is it an example of a system that has given officers too much power to decide what counts as fleeing? Case 3, Chatham County, Georgia, January 2023. The state with the loosest policy in America. Georgia. More specifically, the Georgia State Patrol, the statewide law enforcement agency responsible for patrolling Georgia's highways. And the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, which spent more than a year investigating the GSP's pursuit record, filing more than 70 public records requests, reviewing thousands of pursuit files, and producing one of the most detailed accountability investigations in recent American journalism. Here's what they found. Between 2019 and 2023, 5 years, the Georgia State Patrol was involved in more than 6,700 pursuits. More than half of those pursuits ended in crashes. At least 63 people were killed. Nearly 1,900 were injured, and the agency's use of the pit maneuver during that period, more than 2,000 times, leading to 19 deaths and at least 750 injuries, including 70 people who suffered serious injuries. Those numbers by themselves are extraordinary. But what makes Georgia's situation particularly striking is the policy context that produced them. Unlike virtually every other state law enforcement agency in the country, the Georgia State Patrol's pursuit policy has historically offered troopers near total discretion to initiate and continue pursuits, regardless of what the initial offense was, regardless of the risk to the public. A pursuit could be initiated for a minor traffic violation. A pit could be authorized at any speed. A trooper was not required to obtain supervisory approval before either pursuing or performing a PIT. The The policy simply required that actions be objectively reasonable, a phrase broad enough to accommodate almost anything. Chuck Wexler, the executive director of the Police Executive Research Forum, told the AJC, "At a high speed, what you're basically doing is putting that car out of control." Jeff Alpert, a University of South Carolina professor who has studied police pursuits for more than 30 years, was even more direct. Those are deadly force, and unless deadly force is justified, there is no way to justify a pit maneuver at that speed. Lou Dekmar, a retired Georgia police chief and former president of the International Association of Chiefs of Police, put the institutional question plainly: the cost of all the injuries and deaths is not worth it, especially when most of these started with misdemeanor offenses or traffic infractions. The AJC analysis found that at least 14 of the 19 pit-related deaths in Georgia over that 5-year period occurred during maneuvers performed at speeds between 80 and 126 miles per hour. The agency's own internal policy described the pit as a last resort. In practice, it was the most commonly used pursuit termination tactic in the agency's toolkit. Roughly half of all GSP pursuits from 2019 through 2023 that resulted in a crash involved a pit maneuver. Aimee Padgett, the expired tag that started everything. In January 2023, the Georgia State Patrol's pursuit record produced one of its most documented tragedies, a case that would become central to the AJC investigation and to the broader national conversation. Aimee Humans Padgett was 49 years old. She was a mother, a daughter. Her adult daughter would later describe her. She had 2 grandchildren. She had a son, then around 12 years old, who was being raised by her father and stepmother in Liberty County after her death. That boy will grow up without his mother. The pursuit began when Chatham County police officers noticed an expired registration tag on Padgett's white Nissan Murano. They activated their lights to pull her over. She did not stop. She drove away, cutting through someone's yard. The Chatham County officers did not pursue. The department policy prohibited chasing a driver for traffic violations when the vehicle's information was already known and there was no immediate public safety need. They had her tag. They could have followed up later. But Padgett was now on the highway, and she crossed into Georgia State Patrol jurisdiction. GSP operates under no such restriction. A trooper picked up the pursuit. A cadet in field training was in the passenger seat. This would be his first ever pit maneuver outside of training. The field training officer, Trooper Zachary Montano, coached a cadet from the passenger seat. Dashcam audio captured his instructions. "Hold on, just let it go for a second. We want to give it a little more speed before we try to pit this thing." Cadet Cole Newsel accelerated. He moved the patrol vehicle into position alongside Padgett's Murano. The speed at the moment of contact, analyzed by the AJC from the dashcam footage, approximately 80 miles per hour. The PIT did not go as intended. Instead of spinning cleanly to the right and coming to a stop, Padgett's Murano hit the concrete median divider and went airborne. It rolled. On the third of 4 rolls, Aimee Humans Padgett was thrown from the vehicle. She was killed. The GSP's internal investigation found that the push bumper on the front of Cadet's patrol car had slipped off the Nissan during the maneuver, altering the dynamics in a way that sent the SUV toward the median rather than off to the right as intended. The report noted this. It also exonerated both Cadet Newsel and Trooper Montano, an expired license plate tag, a cadet performing his first ever pit, 80 miles per hour on a highway, a woman thrown from a rolling SUV and killed, and an internal investigation that concluded the officers acted appropriately. That is Aimee Padgett's story, and it did not happen in isolation. It was one of 19 deaths the AJC connected to pit maneuvers by the Georgia State Patrol in a single 5-year period. Don Humans, Padgett's father, told the AJC that he had reported her missing in the days before her death because he was worried when she did not come home. He was still learning the details of how she died. "I'm still upset," he said. "I think about it all the time." Her son, now a teenager, is being raised by his grandfather. He will one day know exactly what happened on that Georgia highway, what the data really shows. The AJC investigation's most significant finding was not just about the numbers. It was about who bears the cost of Georgia's pursuit policy. The analysis found that many of those killed and injured during GSP pursuits were not the drivers who fled. They were passengers, bystanders, people in other cars who had done nothing wrong and happened to be in the wrong place when a high-speed pursuit crossed their path. Federal data from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration confirmed what the AJC found at the state level. Georgia had the highest death rate from police pursuits of any state in the country in the years studied. The Georgia State Patrol declined to make leadership available for interview. In a written response, the agency defended its policy as proportionately appropriate to the rise in crime. It stated that driver responsibility to stop for law enforcement cannot be overlooked or overemphasized. Georgia's reform advocates and legal experts push back on exactly that framing. If spinning a car at 80 miles per hour can kill someone, asked one criminal justice advocate, how is that different from pulling a trigger? The question of whether the pit maneuver at high speed should be formally classified as deadly force rather than simply a pursuit tactic has become one of the central demands in the ongoing reform conversation. A 2023 report from the U.S. Department of Justice went further, recommending that pursuits in general should only occur when two standards are met: a violent crime has been committed, and the suspect poses an imminent threat to commit another violent crime. You can get a suspect another day, the DOJ report stated, but you can't get a life back. Comment: the pursuit of Aimee Padgett started over an expired license plate. She was killed when a cadet in training performed his first pit at 80 miles per hour. The officers were exonerated. Do you think that outcome, no accountability, no charges, is acceptable? Or does something need to change? When it works, when it kills, and what should change? When the PIT is exactly what it should be. It would be dishonest to tell only one side of this story. And this video is not about telling only one side. So before we go into the debate, it is important to be clear about when the pit maneuver does exactly what it was designed to do, and why the people who support it under the right circumstances have a real argument. The scenario law enforcement agencies point to most often is this: a vehicle is being driven at speed through a populated area. The driver has already demonstrated willingness to harm others, swerving into traffic, running people off the road, hitting vehicles, and other options have either failed or are not viable. Spike strips may not be deployable in time. Boxing in the vehicle may not be possible. Calling off the pursuit may mean that driver continues at speed through neighborhoods onto highways where even more people are at risk. In those situations, where a driver has turned their vehicle into an active weapon aimed at whoever happens to be in their path, the pit at controlled speed, performed by a trained officer on a stretch of road with room to manage the outcome, can stop something far worse from happening. This is not hypothetical. It has happened. It continues to happen. And the officers who use it in those moments are making a judgment call under extreme time pressure that most of us will never face. What separates those scenarios from the cases we cover today is not the tactic itself. It is the conditions under which it is deployed. Justin Battenfield was driving into oncoming traffic at highway speeds. That is a genuine public safety emergency. A supervisor made a call. An officer executed it. The outcome was catastrophic. But the decision to act was made in response to a real and escalating danger, not a theoretical one. Aimee Padgett was driving away from police over an expired tag on a highway. She was not shooting at anyone. She was not driving into oncoming traffic. She was not armed. The pursuit that ended with her thrown from a rolling SUV was initiated because of a tag violation, and the agency that initiated it did not require its officers to ask a supervisor whether that qualified as a situation where a pit was warranted. Those two situations are not the same. The policy that treats them the same is a problem. What the national picture looks like. The Washington Post conducted a year-long investigation into pit maneuver deaths, published in 2020 and covering incidents from 2016 onward. At the time of publication, they had identified at least 30 deaths from pit maneuvers since 2016. 18 of those deaths followed pursuits initiated for minor traffic violations: speeding, not stopping at a signal, an expired plate. 10 of those killed were passengers in the fleeing vehicle, people who had not made any decision to flee and often did not even know they were in a car being pursued by police. 4 were bystanders. There is no federal requirement that law enforcement agencies track or report pit maneuver use or outcomes. There is no centralized database. There is no standard definition of what qualifies as a pit across jurisdictions. The actual total number of deaths and injuries from this technique across the country is unknown, not because the data does not exist, but because nobody is required to collect it. That is not a policy gap. That is a choice. And it is the kind of choice that allows a practice to continue, expand, and become more common without any systemic accountability for what it produces. Between 2016 and 2022, Arkansas State Police PIT usage rose by 387%. In the same period, after the Nicole Harper settlement supposedly imposed stricter standards, 3 drivers died in 3 months. In Georgia, 2,000 plus pits over 5 years, 19 deaths, nearly 1,900 injuries, and a pursuit policy that experts across the political spectrum have described as among the most permissive in the country. At the same time, departments like Los Angeles have placed hard caps on pit speed, 35 miles per hour. Albuquerque's policy requires 3 units to be involved before a pit can be initiated. Many agencies require supervisory approval before any pursuit termination maneuver can be executed. Nevada's Highway Patrol restricts pits to situations involving suspects who pose a serious threat to society. These restrictions exist because these agencies have decided that the public interest is better served by policies that are specific rather than discretionary. The PIT maneuver is not inherently wrong. Used correctly, by a trained officer at low speed on an appropriate stretch of road, in response to a driver who represents a genuine imminent threat to others, it can end something dangerous before it becomes something tragic. The problem is not the technique. The problem is the absence of consistent, enforceable standards for when it can be used and how, and the complete lack of a national system to track what it does when those standards are absent. The families. Justin Battenfield's mother, Carol Henson, believed her son would have come home. She believed she would still have him. She does not know why he ran. She does not know why he would not stop. What she knows is that he was mentally disabled, that he liked to drive, and that a supervisor told a trooper to stop him by any means necessary at 109 miles per hour on a public road, and that now she does not have a son. Don Humans, Aimee Padgett's father, still thinks about it all the time. Her son, a child, is growing up in someone else's home because of a pursuit that started over a license plate tag and ended with a cadet's first pit at 80 miles per hour. The officers were exonerated. No charges were filed. The Georgia State Patrol declined to be interviewed. Nicole Harper got a policy change and a legal settlement. Her baby survived. She is alive. She also has a memory of being upside down in an overturned vehicle on a highway, 2 months pregnant, listening to a police officer explain what a pit maneuver is after the fact. These are not anti-police stories. They are stories about the gap between what a policy is supposed to achieve and what it actually produces when it is applied without limits, without oversight, and without the requirement to count the dead. What the debate has produced so far. The national conversation about police pursuits and pit maneuvers has accelerated significantly since 2020. The Police Executive Research Forum's 2023 report recommended tight restrictions on pursuits, limiting them to violent felonies where the suspect poses an ongoing imminent threat. The Department of Justice's guidance has moved in the same direction. Individual cities, including Atlanta, have placed specific restrictions on pit use in dense neighborhoods and required supervisory approval. Georgia state legislators have begun looking at statewide standards following the AJC's investigation. Multiple families of people killed in GSP pursuits have filed lawsuits. The agency's refusal to be interviewed or substantively engage with the investigation has itself become part of the story. The Washington Post investigation noted that 10 of the 30-plus people they identified as killed by pit maneuvers were passengers, people who had no say in whether to flee, who were simply in the car, for were bystanders. Nearly half of those killed were black, Hispanic, or Native American. These patterns matter, and they matter more because there is no requirement to track them. The closing argument. The title of today's video is When Cops Crashed on Purpose. And by now you understand that this is not a simple story. There are moments, real moments, documented moments, where deliberate crash is the only tool left between a fleeing driver and a catastrophic accident involving people who did nothing wrong. Where the supervisor's order to stop a car is not recklessness but necessity. Where the officer who executes a pit is doing the only thing available to them that might prevent something worse. And there are moments, also real, also documented, where the same tactic is used at 100 miles per hour against someone who ran a red light, against a pregnant woman who was slowing down and looking for somewhere to pull over, against a man with a mental disability who loved to drive the roads around his house. The question is not whether the pit should exist. It is whether the system that governs when it can be used is doing its job, whether the people making the decisions have the training, the guidelines, and the oversight to make those decisions well. Whether the families of the people killed are owed more than an internal investigation that finds the officers acted appropriately and goes no further. And whether a country that does not even require its law enforcement agencies to track how many people this tactic kills can honestly say it has thought seriously about the answer. Justin Battenfield's mother thought he would have come home. Aimee Padgett's son is growing up without her over an expired tag. Nicole Harper's baby survived, but she did not get to choose between stopping and being rammed on a highway. She just got rammed. These are the costs of a tactic that every American should know more about. Today's video is a step toward that. If this video gave you something to think about, share it. Not because there's a simple answer to put at the end of it, but because this conversation is too important to leave only to the people inside the departments that use this technique and the families of the people it kills. Like the video, subscribe to Behind the Crime, and hit the notification bell so you never miss the next one. Every week, we go deeper than the headline, because the full story is always worth knowing. I will see you in the next one. Final question. After going through all of this, the Fort Smith cases, the Georgia record, the national data, where do you land? Should the pit maneuver be banned, restricted, left as is, or something else entirely? Drop your honest answer below. There is no wrong answer. I want the debate. In case if you haven't subscribed now, like, comment, and share this video, and I'll see you in the next one.